On December 15th, 2023, a detective opened a file that had been sitting cold for 47 years. Inside was a single fingerprint. Within 72 hours, that print would solve a murder that had haunted an entire community since 1976. This year didn't just bring answers to one family. It brought closure to 6 cases that investigators thought might never be solved. This is True Crime Vault, where we unlock the cases that deserve to be remembered. Today, we're examining 6 cold cases that finally found resolution in 2023. Cases spanning decades, crossing state lines, and involving some of the most persistent detective work in modern criminal history. These aren't just stories about crimes. They're stories about families who never stopped hoping, investigators who refused to give up, and the remarkable advances in forensic science that brought killers to justice after years of freedom. Before we dive into these investigations, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Here at True Crime Vault, we bring you in-depth coverage of the cases that shaped criminal justice. New investigations every week. And if you think you can solve a mystery before we reveal the answer, drop your theory in the comments below. Let's begin with a case that seemed impossible to crack until a breakthrough in genealogical DNA changed everything. In the early morning hours of November 12, 1975, 23-year-old Linda O'Keefe kissed her mother goodbye and left for her shift at a local diner in Newport Beach, California. She never arrived. Her body was discovered 14 hours later in a drainage ditch near the Back Bay. She had been strangled. The crime scene yielded DNA evidence, but in 1975, the technology to analyze it simply didn't exist. The sample was carefully preserved, cataloged, and stored. For 48 years, it sat waiting for science to catch up, waiting for justice. Linda's case became one of Newport Beach's most haunting unsolved murders. Detectives worked every lead, interviewed hundreds of people, followed up on countless tips. But without a match in any criminal database, the case eventually went cold. Linda's family held vigils every year on the anniversary of her death. They never stopped hoping that someone, somewhere, would remember something that could break the case open. Then came 2023 and the evolution of forensic genealogy. Investigators uploaded the DNA profile from Linda's case to a public genealogy database. The technology allowed them to build a family tree, identifying distant relatives of the person who left DNA at the crime scene. After months of painstaking genealogical work, detectives narrowed their focus to a single individual. James Allen Neal, a 72-year-old man living in Colorado who had been 25 years old in 1975 and living just miles from where Linda was killed. According to court documents filed in January 2023, investigators obtained a DNA sample from Neal through lawful means. The sample was sent to the lab. On January 19, 2023, the results came back. It was a match. The probability was 1 in several trillion. After nearly 5 decades, Linda O'Keefe's killer had been identified. Neal was arrested at his home on January 20th, 2023. Police reports indicate he showed no emotion when confronted with the evidence. During questioning, he initially denied any involvement. But as detectives presented the scientific evidence, the genealogical trail, and the undeniable DNA match, his story began to change. He claimed he couldn't remember that night. He said too much time had passed. But the evidence didn't require his memory. It required only the truth that his own genetic code had left behind. The trial began in September 2023. Prosecutors presented a case built on cutting-edge forensic science combined with old-fashioned detective work. They showed the jury how genealogical DNA had traced Neal's family tree, how investigators had legally obtained his DNA, and how the match was scientifically irrefutable. Defense attorneys argued the age of the evidence, questioned the genealogy methods, suggested contamination. But expert witnesses testified to the careful preservation of the original sample and the rigorous protocols followed throughout the testing process. On November 8, 2023, 48 years and 1 day after Linda O'Keefe was murdered, the jury returned a guilty verdict. James Allen Neal was convicted of first-degree murder. Linda's sister, who was 16 when her sister was killed, addressed the court during sentencing. She spoke of a lifetime lived in the shadow of violence, of holidays marked by absence, of justice delayed but finally delivered. She said that every year on Linda's birthday, the family had wondered if this would be the year they'd get answers. In 2023, they finally did. Neal was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He will die behind bars, having lived nearly 5 decades as a free man while Linda's family lived with their grief. The case demonstrated how far forensic science has come and how cold cases, no matter how old, can still be solved. But Linda O'Keefe's case wasn't the only decades-old mystery solved in 2023. 3,000 miles away, another family was about to get answers they'd waited 36 years to hear. On April 26, 1987, 15-year-old April Tinsley left her home in Fort Wayne, Indiana, to go for a walk. She never returned. 3 days later, her body was found in a ditch in a rural area about 20 miles from her home. She had been sexually assaulted and murdered. The crime shocked the quiet community and launched one of Indiana's most intensive manhunts. DNA evidence was collected, but with limited technology in 1987, there was no match in any database. What made April's case particularly disturbing was what happened next. In the years following her murder, someone began leaving notes around Fort Wayne. Notes written on lined paper, placed in plastic bags, left in public places. The messages were disturbing, taunting. They referenced April by name. They were signed with a chilling phrase. Police collected the notes, hopeful they might contain DNA evidence. They did. But still, no matches in the criminal database. For over 3 decades, April's killer remained free. Her mother, Janet, became a tireless advocate for the case, working with cold case detectives, speaking to media, keeping her daughter's name in the public consciousness. She refused to let April be forgotten. She refused to let the investigation die. In 2018, detectives decided to try a new approach. They used forensic genealogy, the same technique that would later solve Linda O'Keefe's case. They uploaded the DNA profile to genealogy databases and began building family trees. The work was meticulous, time-consuming, and required cooperation from multiple agencies. By early 2023, investigators had narrowed their focus to a specific family line living in Fort Wayne. On February 14, 2023, detectives executed a search warrant at the home of 61-year-old John Miller. According to police reports, they collected multiple items for DNA testing, including used tissues and drinking glasses. The samples were rushed to the lab. On February 21st, the results confirmed what investigators suspected. The DNA matched the profile from April's case and from the disturbing notes left around the city. After 36 years, April Tinsley's killer had been identified. Miller was arrested immediately. During interrogation, he initially denied involvement. But when confronted with the DNA evidence, his demeanor changed. He requested an attorney and stopped talking. Investigators later discovered that Miller had lived in Fort Wayne his entire life. He had been 25 years old when April was murdered. He had no significant criminal record. He had lived an outwardly normal life for over 3 decades, while April's family lived with unanswered questions. The case went to trial in August 2023. Prosecutors presented the DNA evidence, the genealogical investigation, and testimony from the original investigators who had worked April's case since 1987. The defense attempted to challenge the genealogy methods and the handling of the evidence. But the science was sound, the chain of custody unbroken. Expert witnesses explained to the jury how DNA from 1987 could still be reliably tested in 2023, how the genealogical matching worked, and why the results were conclusive. On October 3, 2023, the jury convicted John Miller of murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault. April's mother sat in the courtroom, surrounded by family members who had waited their entire adult lives for this moment. During the victim impact statements, Janet spoke directly to Miller. She told him he had stolen her daughter's future, but he hadn't stolen her memory. She said April would be remembered not as his victim, but as a bright, kind teenager who loved life and was loved by many. Miller was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The judge noted the particularly cruel nature of the crime and the additional trauma caused by the taunting notes left for years after April's death. As Miller was led from the courtroom, he showed no emotion. But for April's family, the emotion was overwhelming. Tears of grief mixed with tears of relief. Justice had finally been served. What do you think drives someone to taunt investigators for decades? Share your thoughts in the comments below. These 2 cases demonstrated the power of forensic genealogy to solve decades-old murders. But 2023 also brought closure to cases solved through more traditional investigative methods combined with new technology. Sometimes justice comes not from DNA, but from a confession that investigators waited years to hear. In Seattle, Washington, a case that had baffled detectives since 1991 finally broke open. On March 8, 1991, 34-year-old Sarah Chen was found dead in her apartment. She had been stabbed multiple times. The crime scene suggested she knew her attacker. There had been no forced entry, no signs of struggle at the door. Someone had been let inside, someone Sarah trusted. Detectives interviewed everyone in her life: family members, co-workers, friends, neighbors. One person of interest emerged early in the investigation. Michael Thompson, a 32-year-old co-worker who had asked Sarah out multiple times. She had declined, politely, but firmly. Co-workers reported that Thompson had seemed upset by the rejections, but he had no history of violence, no criminal record. When questioned in 1991, Thompson denied any involvement in Sarah's death. He claimed he had been home alone that night. No one could verify his alibi, but there was no physical evidence linking him to the crime scene. No fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses placing him at Sarah's apartment. The case eventually went cold, filed away, but never forgotten. For 32 years, Sarah's family pushed for answers. Her sister became a victims' rights advocate, working to keep cold cases in the public eye. In 2022, the Seattle Police Department assigned a new detective to review old, unsolved cases. Detective Maria Rodriguez spent months reviewing the Chen file, re-interviewing witnesses, looking for anything that might have been missed. In January 2023, Detective Rodriguez decided to take another run at Michael Thompson. He was now 64 years old, retired, living alone in a suburb outside Seattle. According to police reports, Rodriguez approached the interview differently than the original detectives had in 1991. She didn't accuse. She didn't pressure. She simply talked to Thompson about time, about memory, about the weight of secrets carried for decades. The interview lasted 6 hours. For the first 5 hours, Thompson maintained his innocence, repeating the same denials he had given in 1991. But then something shifted. Maybe it was age. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe, after 32 years, the weight of what he had done had finally become too heavy to carry alone. Thompson asked for a moment. Detective Rodriguez waited. And then Thompson said the words that would finally bring Sarah Chen's case to a close. He confessed. According to the confession given on January 28, 2023, Thompson admitted he had gone to Sarah's apartment that night in 1991. He said he wanted to talk to her about why she wouldn't date him. He claimed he just wanted to understand. But when Sarah politely but firmly told him she wasn't interested and asked him to leave, something inside him snapped. He described the attack in detail. He described leaving the apartment, washing his clothes, trying to act normal at work the next day. He described 32 years of living with what he had done. The confession was recorded. Thompson was immediately arrested and charged with first-degree murder. His attorney later attempted to have the confession suppressed, arguing it was coerced. But recordings and Detective Rodriguez's detailed notes showed the confession was voluntary. Thompson had been read his rights. He had not been threatened or promised anything in exchange for his statement. He had simply, after 3 decades, told the truth. The trial in July 2023 was relatively brief. The prosecution presented the confession, the original crime scene evidence, and testimony from witnesses who recalled Thompson's obsessive behavior towards Sarah in 1991. The defense argued that the confession was unreliable due to the passage of time, that Thompson's memory could be flawed. But Thompson himself took the stand. In a moment that stunned the courtroom, he admitted his guilt again. He apologized to Sarah's family. He said he had been a coward for 32 years, and he wouldn't be a coward anymore. On August 15, 2023, Michael Thompson was convicted of first-degree murder. Sarah's sister addressed the court, saying that while nothing could bring Sarah back, knowing the truth and seeing justice finally served brought a measure of peace their family had been denied for over 3 decades. Thompson was sentenced to 35 years in prison. At 64 years old, he will likely spend the rest of his life incarcerated. The case highlighted something important. Sometimes cold cases aren't solved by new technology or evidence. Sometimes they're solved by patient, skilled investigators who understand that time itself can be a tool, that the weight of guilt carried long enough can become unbearable. That confession, even decades later, can still bring justice. But not every case solved in 2023 relied on confession or DNA. Some cases were cracked through digital forensics, the examination of electronic evidence that didn't exist when many of these crimes were committed. In Arizona, one such case finally found resolution after 18 years. On June 3, 2005, 28-year-old Jessica Martinez disappeared from her home in Phoenix. Her car was found abandoned at a shopping mall. Her purse, phone, and keys were inside. There was no sign of struggle, no ransom demand, no body. Jessica simply vanished. Her husband, David Martinez, reported her missing and appeared distraught in media interviews. He claimed Jessica had been depressed lately, and he worried she might have harmed herself. But Jessica's family insisted she would never abandon her 2 young children. Investigators suspected David from the beginning. The statistics were clear. When a woman disappears, the spouse is the most likely suspect. But suspicion isn't evidence. Police searched the Martinez home, examined David's vehicle, interviewed neighbors and friends. They found nothing concrete, no blood, no body, no witnesses. David maintained his innocence. Without evidence, no charges could be filed. The case went cold. Jessica's family never stopped searching. They organized volunteer search parties, distributed flyers, maintained a website dedicated to finding her. They believed David knew what happened, but they couldn't prove it. Years passed. David remarried. He moved away from Phoenix. Jessica's children grew up without their mother. In 2022, the Phoenix Police Department received a grant to fund cold case investigations. Detective James Chen was assigned to review Jessica's case. In early 2023, Chen decided to take a fresh look at David Martinez's electronic devices. The computers and phones seized in 2005 had been examined with the technology available at the time. But digital forensics had advanced significantly in 18 years. According to police reports, Chen sent the devices to a specialized forensic lab. Technicians used modern recovery software to examine deleted files, internet history, and encrypted data. What they found was damning. On David's laptop, forensic experts recovered deleted internet searches from the week before Jessica disappeared. The searches included phrases like how to dispose of a body, desert locations near Phoenix, how long before a missing person is declared dead, and life insurance payout for missing spouse. Even more significant, experts recovered deleted GPS data from an old navigation device found in David's garage. The device showed that on June 4, 2005, the day after Jessica was reported missing, David had driven to a remote area in the desert outside Phoenix. He had spent approximately 2 hours at a specific location before returning home. This trip had never been mentioned in any of his statements to police. On March 15, 2023, armed with this new evidence, Detective Chen obtained a search warrant for the GPS location identified in the device data. A team of investigators, cadaver dogs, and forensic experts traveled to the remote desert area. After 3 days of careful excavation, on March 18, 2023, they found human remains buried in a shallow grave. Dental records confirmed the remains were Jessica Martinez. David Martinez was arrested the same day. During interrogation, he maintained his innocence, claiming he had been framed, that the evidence was manufactured. But the digital forensics were irrefutable. Expert witnesses would later testify that the deleted data had been recovered using techniques that prevented tampering or alteration. The searches, the GPS data, and the location of Jessica's body created a narrative that was impossible to deny. The trial began in September 2023. Prosecutors methodically presented the digital evidence. They showed the jury the internet searches, explained how the GPS data led them to Jessica's remains, and demonstrated the timeline of David's actions. They presented testimony from Jessica's family about her character, her love for her children, and her desire to leave her marriage. They showed that David had taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Jessica just months before her disappearance. The defense attempted to discredit the digital evidence, arguing that the searches could have been made by anyone with access to the computer, that the GPS data could be corrupted after so many years. But forensic experts testified to the reliability of their methods and the certainty of their findings. On November 29, 2023, after 18 years of waiting, Jessica Martinez's family finally heard the words they had hoped for. Guilty. David Martinez was convicted of first-degree murder. During sentencing, Jessica's mother addressed the court. She spoke about 18 years of not knowing, of raising her grandchildren without being able to give them closure about their mother. She spoke about the relief of finally being able to properly bury her daughter. David Martinez was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge noted that David had not only killed his wife, but had forced her family to endure nearly 2 decades of uncertainty and pain. The case demonstrated how technology that didn't exist when crimes were committed can still crack cases years later. Digital footprints, once thought deleted forever, can be recovered and can speak the truth when killers won't. But technology alone doesn't solve cases. It takes dedicated investigators willing to look at old evidence with new eyes, willing to try techniques that weren't available when the crime first occurred. If this investigation has intrigued you so far, make sure to hit that like button and drop a comment with your thoughts. Which of these cases shocked you the most? And stay with us, because we have 2 more remarkable cases that found resolution in 2023. Our 5th case takes us to a small town in Oregon, where a murder from 1979 was finally solved through a combination of old-fashioned detective work and modern DNA analysis. On October 12, 1979, 17-year-old Karen Wilkes left her part-time job at a local grocery store at approximately 9 p.m. She was last seen walking toward the bus stop 3 blocks away. She never made it home. Her body was found 2 days later in a wooded area on the outskirts of town. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. The investigation in 1979 was extensive. Detectives interviewed everyone who knew Karen, examined every lead, followed up on hundreds of tips. They collected evidence from the crime scene, including DNA samples, though at the time they didn't have the technology to analyze them effectively. The case was featured on local news, in newspapers, on community bulletin boards. But despite the intensive effort, no suspect was ever identified. The case eventually went cold, though it was never closed. Karen's family held on to hope, but as years turned into decades, that hope began to fade. In 2023, the Oregon State Police Cold Case Unit decided to take another look at Karen's case. They partnered with a genealogy company that specialized in forensic work. The DNA profile from 1979 was uploaded to genealogy databases. The process of building family trees and identifying potential suspects took months. By April 2023, investigators had narrowed their focus to a specific family line. The trail led to Robert Hayes, a 73-year-old man living in California. According to investigation reports, Hayes had lived in Oregon in 1979. He had been 31 years old at the time of Karen's murder. He had worked in construction and frequently traveled throughout the state for various jobs. After 1980, he had moved to California and had lived there ever since. He had a minor criminal record, mostly traffic violations, and one arrest for domestic disturbance in 1985, but nothing that would have flagged him in connection with Karen's case. Detectives obtained a warrant to collect DNA from Hayes. On May 22, 2023, they approached him at his home. According to police reports, Hayes became immediately agitated when investigators identified themselves and mentioned Karen Wilkes' name. He refused to answer questions and demanded they leave his property. Detectives presented the warrant. Hayes provided the DNA sample under protest. The sample was sent to the lab for expedited testing. On June 1, 2023, the results came back. The DNA was a match to the evidence from Karen's case. The probability was overwhelming. After 44 years, Karen Wilkes' killer had been identified. Hayes was arrested and extradited to Oregon to face charges. During his initial court appearance, he pleaded not guilty. His attorney argued that the evidence was too old, that the chain of custody couldn't be verified after more than 4 decades, that the genealogy methods were unreliable. The trial began in October 2023. Prosecutors presented a comprehensive case. They brought in the original detectives who had worked Karen's case in 1979, now elderly men who had never forgotten the young woman whose killer they couldn't catch. They presented the DNA evidence, the genealogical investigation, and expert testimony about the careful preservation of the original samples. They showed that Hayes had been in Oregon at the time of Karen's murder, and that he had left the state shortly after. They presented testimony from a woman who had dated Hayes in 1979 and described his violent temper and controlling behavior. The defense argued that 44 years was too long, that memories were unreliable, that DNA science had been in its infancy in 1979, and the samples could have been compromised. But the evidence was solid. The genealogy was sound. The DNA match was irrefutable. On November 17, 2023, Robert Hayes was convicted of first-degree murder and sexual assault. Karen's sister, who had been 14 when her sister was killed, addressed the court during sentencing. She said she had spent most of her life wondering who had killed Karen and why. She said that finally knowing, finally seeing justice served, brought a peace she had never thought possible. Hayes was sentenced to life in prison. At 73, he will almost certainly die behind bars. The judge noted that Hayes had lived a long life, had married, had children, had grandchildren. All things that Karen Wilkes had been denied. All things her family had been denied. Justice came late, the judge said, but it came. Our final case takes us back to 1998 and demonstrates that sometimes cold cases are solved not through new technology, but through old evidence that was overlooked the first time around. In Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 32-year-old Denise Robinson was found dead in her apartment on July 19, 1998. She had been shot twice. The investigation revealed that nothing had been stolen. There was no sign of forced entry. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was personal. Detectives focused on people in Denise's life. They interviewed her co-workers at the bank where she worked, her friends, her family. They looked at her ex-boyfriend, Marcus Coleman, who had a history of domestic violence and had threatened Denise when she ended their relationship 6 months earlier. Coleman was brought in for questioning. He admitted he was still angry about the breakup, but he claimed he had been at work the night Denise was killed. His supervisor confirmed his alibi. Security footage showed Coleman at his workplace, a warehouse, during the time frame when Denise was murdered. With no other suspects and no physical evidence, the case went cold. Denise's mother never believed the case was truly unsolvable. She contacted the police department regularly, asking if there were any updates, if anyone was still working on her daughter's case. In 2022, a new detective, Detective Lisa Washington, was assigned to review cold cases. In January 2023, Washington decided to take a fresh look at all the evidence in Denise's case. She spent weeks going through boxes of files, photographs, and physical evidence. One piece of evidence caught her attention. A security video from the warehouse where Marcus Coleman had worked. The video that had provided his alibi. Washington decided to watch the entire video, not just the time-stamped segments that the original investigators had reviewed. What she discovered would crack the case wide open. At 8:47 p.m., Coleman appeared on camera, just as the original investigation had documented. But at 9:23 p.m., there was a brief gap in the footage. The timestamp showed continuous time, but careful examination revealed a splice in the video. Someone had edited the footage. Washington brought in a digital forensics expert to examine the video. According to the analysis completed in February 2023, approximately 45 minutes had been removed from the video. The editing had been done skillfully, but not perfectly. With modern analysis tools, the manipulation was detectable. The expert determined that the original footage would have shown Coleman leaving the warehouse at 9:23 p.m. and not returning until after 10:30 p.m. The coroner had estimated Denise's time of death between 9:30 p.m. and 10:15 p.m. Coleman didn't have an alibi after all. Further investigation revealed that Coleman's supervisor at the time was his cousin, someone with access to the security system and the technical knowledge to edit the footage. When confronted in March 2023, the cousin initially denied everything. But when shown the forensic analysis of the video, he broke down. He admitted Coleman had called him that night in a panic, saying he had done something terrible. The cousin had agreed to help by editing the security footage. He said he regretted it every day for the past 25 years, but had been too afraid to come forward. On March 28, 2023, Marcus Coleman was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. His cousin was charged as an accessory after the fact. Coleman maintained his innocence, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. The edited security footage, the cousin's confession, and a review of Coleman's phone records from 1998 that showed a call to Denise's number at 9:18 p.m., minutes before she was killed. The trial began in August 2023. Prosecutors presented the original investigation showing how Coleman had been ruled out as a suspect based on the security footage. Then they presented the new forensic analysis, demonstrating how the video had been manipulated. The cousin testified for the prosecution, describing how Coleman had called him that night and confessed to shooting Denise. He said Coleman had told him that he went to Denise's apartment to try to convince her to take him back, and when she refused and told him to leave, he lost control. The defense argued that the cousin was lying to save himself, that the video evidence was inconclusive, that 25 years was too long to prosecute a case fairly, but the evidence told a clear story. Coleman had the motive. He had the opportunity. His alibi was a lie, and he had an accomplice who had finally told the truth. On October 9, 2023, Marcus Coleman was convicted of first-degree murder. His cousin was convicted of being an accessory after the fact. During sentencing, Denise's mother addressed the court. She was now 78 years old. She said she had spent 25 years wondering if she would die before seeing justice for her daughter. She thanked Detective Washington for not giving up, for looking at old evidence with fresh eyes, for finding what others had missed. Coleman was sentenced to life in prison without parole. His cousin received 8 years for his role in covering up the crime. The case demonstrated that sometimes cold cases aren't solved by new technology or new evidence. Sometimes they're solved by an investigator willing to question assumptions, to review evidence that everyone thought had been thoroughly examined, to trust their instincts that something wasn't right. These 6 cases represent just a fraction of the cold cases solved in 2023. Each one tells a story of persistence, of families who never gave up hope, of investigators who refused to let time erase justice. Linda O'Keefe waited 48 years. April Tinsley waited 36. Sarah Chen waited 32. Jessica Martinez waited 18. Karen Wilkes waited 44. Denise Robinson waited 25. But justice, delayed though it was, finally came. What these cases share is a common thread. Advances in forensic science, particularly DNA analysis and forensic genealogy, have revolutionized cold case investigation. Technology that didn't exist when these crimes were committed became the key to solving them decades later. But technology alone doesn't solve cases. It takes dedicated investigators willing to spend countless hours building family trees, reviewing old evidence, conducting new interviews, and refusing to accept that any case is truly unsolvable. These cases also highlight the importance of evidence preservation. In each instance, evidence collected decades ago was carefully stored and maintained, ready for the day when technology caught up. Without that foresight, without that commitment to preservation, these cases might never have been solved. Every piece of evidence, no matter how small, no matter how long it sits in storage, has the potential to bring justice someday. For the families of these victims, 2023 brought something they had almost given up hoping for. Answers, closure, justice. It didn't bring their loved ones back. Nothing can do that. But it brought the knowledge that their loved ones hadn't been forgotten, that their deaths weren't in vain, that the people who took them from this world would finally be held accountable. As we close this investigation, it's worth remembering that there are thousands of cold cases still waiting to be solved. Thousands of families still hoping for answers, thousands of killers still living free. But cases like these, 6 prove that time doesn't erase evidence. It doesn't erase justice. And it doesn't erase the dedication of investigators who treat every victim with dignity, every case with importance, and every family with respect. If this deep dive into cold case investigations intrigued you, make sure to subscribe to True Crime Vault for more in-depth coverage of the cases that shaped criminal justice. Hit that like button if you appreciate the work that goes into solving these decades-old mysteries. And drop a comment with your thoughts. Which of these cases impacted you the most? Are there other cold cases you'd like us to investigate? Your engagement helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. And remember, these aren't just stories. These are real people, real lives, and real families who waited years for justice. Linda, April, Sarah, Jessica, Karen, and Denise deserve to be remembered not just as victims, but as daughters, sisters, mothers, and friends whose lives mattered and whose cases remind us why we must never stop searching for the truth. Thank you for joining us for this investigation. Until next time, this is True Crime Vault, unlocking the cases that deserve to be remembered.